Welcome to this lecture entitled By Train to Uppingham. My name is Andrew David and I am a former pupil from Uppingham School. A version of this lecture was first delivered to a live audience at Keene House, home of the Model Railway Club, founded 1910, in October 2024, to mark the 130th anniversary of the opening of the former railway branch line to Uppingham in Rutland. This 2025 recording is brought to you in association with the Risborough and District Model Railway Club. To set the scene, let us eavesdrop on what might have been a typical Uppingham School history lesson, touching on the subject of 19th century European railways, some 65 years ago, when the Uppingham railway line was still just in existence.
You drips. Shut up, Travis. I'll fear not what men say. I'll labour night and day to be a pilgrim. Da-da-dum, da-da-dum, tum, 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 tum. Da-da-dum, tum, 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 tum. Your holiday essays. Graves. Charming. Keating. Good. Making an effort at last. Denson. Bad. Cox. Stephen. Distribute. I'm afraid, Michael Travis, I lost your essay somewhere in the Mont Blanc tunnel, but I'm sure it was good. Right. Europe in the 19th century and the growth of nationalism. In studying the 19th century, one thing will be clear, that the growth of technology, telegraph, cheap newspapers, railways, transport, is matched by a failure of imagination, Denson, a fatal inability to understand the meaning and consequences of all these levers, wires, and railways. Climaxing in 1914, when the German Kaiser is told by his generals that he cannot stop the war he has started because it would spoil the railway timetables upon which victory depended.
Thus, the great late Graham Crowden, playing a character named simply as a history teacher in Lindsay Anderson's satirical 1960s film If. A character that was based on a real, equally eccentric history teacher at Uppingham at the time, by the name of Roy Ford, who inspired me as one of his pupils to explore the local railways around Uppingham. The lecture will begin with the development of the railway network in and around Rutland, followed by an account of the passenger branch to Uppingham and the Uppingham Ironstone quarry branch, through to closure and rediscovery of both lines. The final part of the lecture is entitled Uppingham in Miniature and is an account of two models of Uppingham Station. Our story centres around the market town of Uppingham in Rutland, England's smallest county, and home to Uppingham School since 1584. Although Richard Trevithick's 1808 Catch Me Who Can, the world's first fare-paying passenger train as seen here in central London, was a long way from Uppingham, by the 1840s and railway mania, the Iron Way finally reached Rutland. This was with the advent of the Midland Railway Syston to Peterborough line, which by 1840 extended only as far as Saxby, due to the hostile opposition of Lord Harborough of Stapleford Park, a major shareholder in the Oakham Canal, resulting in the infamous Battle of Saxby and a diversion around his property. And although the line was later rerouted, the outline of the infamous Harborough Curve can still be seen as in this recent aerial view. And so the line only entered Rutland in 1848 with an intermediate station named Manton for Uppingham, being just 4 miles from our esteemed market town. The second railway company to enter Rutland was the self-styled Premier Line, the London and North Western Railway, or LNWR. An 1836 Uppingham petition had given support to the proposed line from Rugby to Stamford, and tenders for construction of the line were received in 1840, with completion of the line by 1851. Seaton Station was opened as Seaton (Uppingham) on the 2nd of June 1851, and was later renamed Seaton and Uppingham at an unknown date sometime before 1894. This view shows a contractor's train, and so is probably from around the time of construction of the line. Here we can see members of the station staff at Seaton in the LNWR era, the staff being relatives of Hilary Crowden of the Rutland Local History Society, who provided this photograph. Services ran from the existing LNWR station at Rugby, branching off at a new junction known as Market Harborough Junction No. 1 from the LNWR main line just south of that company's Rugby station. Here, an 1848 Sharp single-wheeler prepares to head towards Market Harborough from Rugby. That is, once the so-called railway policeman, seen in the long black coat on the left, gives the all clear. It would be soon after this that railway policemen started operating from dedicated cabins and became known simply as signalmen. Passenger services on the line were hauled by locomotives such as this preserved Precedent Class 240 No. 790 Hardwick, shown here in a J. Arthur Dixon postcard and at the Museum of British Transport in Clapham, forerunner of the National Railway Museum. Freight trains were typically hauled by locomotives such as this Ramsbottom DX Class 060, No. 3137, seen here at Peterborough Running Shed. This view captured by the late Ken Nunn. Passengers for Uppingham would alight at Seaton, proceeding to Uppingham by horse bus, seen here outside Uppingham's Falcon Hotel, although the service, which was not frequent anyway, was considered far from satisfactory, being often disrupted by winter weather. On the 4th of April 1876, the entire Uppingham School trudged down to the railhead at Seaton to be evacuated by train to the North Wales town of Borth, due to a typhoid epidemic in Uppingham itself, accompanied by copious items of luggage, including 300 beds and a large mechanical cricket pitch roller, such as this one, which was, in fact, put to good use at Borth. No doubt all this equipment was transported to Borth and back on a freight train such as this one, hauled by an LNWR G2080 locomotive. And no doubt this experience added incentive for a rail link directly to Uppingham itself, and indeed, as early as 1860, the Reverend Edward Thring, headmaster of the school at the time, made a diary entry. "There is some talk of a line to Uppingham." One further step towards a better rail service for the town, at least towards London, came in 1880 with the Midland Railway extension from Manton to Kettering, seen here as the lines diverging off to the right at Manton Junction. So now the Rutland rail network looked like this, with the Midland Railway Manton to Kettering line, shown in red here, crossing over the LNWR in black and passing within a few miles of Uppingham. The Midland line then passed over the United Kingdom's longest viaduct spanning a valley, the 82-arch Welland Viaduct, which still carries one East Midlands Railway EMR passenger train per day in each direction. In contrast to the LNWR's extensive use of the more durable Staffordshire Blue engineering bricks, the Midland Railway used their characteristic red bricks, such as seen here at St Pancras. But as you can see from this recent photograph of the viaduct, replacement blue engineering bricks now outnumber the original 30 million Midland red bricks. Uppingham, meanwhile, was still labouring under the lack of a direct rail link, causing difficulties such as the gasworks on Gleyston Road running short of coal in bad weather due to heavy snow. And by the 1880s, pressure was building for a direct connection to Uppingham onto the LNWR, which was finally achieved in 1894. In October 1886, the Stamford and Boston Banking Company were offering to put up £10,000 towards the project, and by 1888 a committee had been formed which raised sufficient funds from residents to put pressure on the LNWR to go ahead with the line, despite opposition from some staff at the school, to the tune that the line would open avenues for the contamination of the boys by the sins of the world. The list of subscribers included the aptly named Mr. Weed, who happened to keep an Uppingham nursery garden. And with the requisite financial support now in place, construction of the line started in 1891, following the Operative Act of Parliament of the 4th of August 1890. So, with the advent of the branch line to the town, the rail network surrounding Uppingham looked like this, with the Midland lines in solid black passing via Manton to Peterborough and to London, and the LNWR in black and white from Rugby to Peterborough, with the junction for Uppingham at Seaton. The branch line to Uppingham left the Peterborough line just to the east of Seaton Station, passing separately under the Midland Kettering line and then looping back, just off this 1894 map to the top, under that company's line by another set of arches, known locally in later times as the Five Arches. Construction of the line began in October 1891 with the draining of the Uppingham bathing place, located below the upper one of the school's playing fields. The 1891 contract plans, now held in the Uppingham School archives, show the line of the branch reaching the terminus below the town to the southeast. These official LNWR drawings from the British Transport Historical Records section of the Public Records Office, and now held at the National Archives Kew, show the proposed passenger station and the goods shed. Whereas the construction of railway lines until now had employed human labour in the form of navvies, the Uppingham branch was one of the first lines to make use of steam-powered machines such as this steam navvy, which replaced the work of 50 men. The machine was supplied by Ruston and Proctor of Lincoln. Construction accidents, such as this one, were, sadly, not uncommon at this time, but fortunately the line escaped lightly, with only one non-fatal incident in 1892, when a wagon load of pitch sleepers caught fire, causing a train to derail down an incline beyond the viaduct. The first school special was run on the 27th of September 1894, while public passenger services commenced on the 1st of October, at which date the "and Uppingham" was dropped from the Seaton name boards, and the station henceforth became known simply as Seaton. On this early 1970s recording, made by myself and now in the Rutland Historical Archives, former railway employee Jack Riches, pictured here, records his memories of the Uppingham branch. You may note that the recording incorrectly refers to him as Jack Ritchie.
This recording was made by Mr. Jack Ritchie, and he is talking about the Rutland railways that he remembers. The interview was carried out by Mr. Andrew David, at the time a student of Uppingham School.
The engine at the time was one of the old Webb 062 coal tanks. They weren't very big, but from my point of view, they were just all right for me.
The following three views show LNWR coal tanks, such as referred to by Jack on the recording. Firstly, in this LNWR X-Works photograph, followed by number 1054 as preserved on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway, and finally a view of the cab of one of the locomotives taken at Seaton by Leicester photographer John F. Clay. Being a single line branch, trains from Seaton could only enter or leave the Uppingham branch when in possession of the required one engine in steam train staff, known simply as the staff, and marked with the legend Seaton Junction on one side and Uppingham on the other. Jack Rich's description of Uppingham Station is reminiscent of this LNWR period view of the station platform.
With Uppingham, the station itself was very well kept, very smart, and in the early part of my visits to it.
In 1901, Lieutenant Colonel C. H. Jones returned to Uppingham from service in the South African War, and is seen here arriving at the station, to a hearty reception and applause, no doubt. However, one wonders if in our age of television and social media, revelations about the British concentration camps and the first use of barbed wire in the Boer War might have provoked quite understandable protests at Colonel Jones's triumphant return. School specials continued throughout the LNWR period of the line. Here is the timetable for the 1902 Easter Vacation Special, with destinations as far away as Dublin and Brighton. Seaton Station is seen here in LNWR days, showing its proximity to the Welland Viaduct, and with an Uppingham train in the bay platform. Here we see an LNWR period lamp belonging to the late Jack Rich's father, and with the legend Uppingham P. Way for Permanent Way and A 1895. In August 1914, the recently formed Railway Executive Committee took control of the UK rail network, and by May 1915 there was 30% more traffic on the network, and with many rail personnel on war service, there was a reduced service at home. Uppingham and Rutland railways bore their fair share of the conflict, but due to wartime restrictions on photography and later government censorship, there is a dearth of wartime photographic evidence. Hence this representative view of a munitions wagon outside the GWR Swindon Works. This painting, entitled The Soulless City, by World War I war artist C.R.W. Nevinson, a pupil at Uppingham School, might well have been inspired by the school special train journeys that he no doubt experienced as a pupil at the school. Although REC control lasted until 1921, this 1919 watercolour by F.S. Robinson appears peaceful enough. By 1922, there had been a modest increase in the number of trains per day, but still at respectable intervals, and hardly suitable to our 21st century commuter needs. Rutland sits on one of the largest iron ore fields in the world, where the metal has been mined from Roman times until now, with a 1285 reference to an Uppingham craftsman named Peter le Irnmanger. By 1870, the Northamptonshire field was producing 7% of the UK's iron supply, with Corby-based Lloyd's Ironstone Company being the first company to deploy a steam-powered mining machine in 1895. In 1912, James Payne and Company opened a pit at Uppingham, to which they built a branch line off the LNWR line for carriage of iron ore from their Uppingham mining facility. This 1913 plan shows Payne's Ironstone line branching off to the right, with a passing loop to accommodate empty wagons, while the LNWR line continues on to Uppingham Station down to the right. Payne's Ironstone line passed under Corby Road, now the A6003, to the south of the town centre, running to the company's first pit, known as Glebe Quarry, lying to the west of Corby Road, as seen on the left-hand side of this map. By 1914, this quarry had reached full production, with the delivery of this 20-ton Ruston Proctor steam shovel. Later in 1914, a second quarry, known as Adderley Quarry, to the east of the Corby Road and to the right on this map, was opened up to cater for the wartime armaments market. This 040 tank locomotive, supplied by Peckett's of Bristol in 1912, was the first steam locomotive at an ironstone quarry in Rutland, and it was used to propel the empty wagons up the gradient to the quarry workings and then bring the loaded ones down to join the LNWR for onward transit. The locomotive was named Uppingham No. 1 with a works number 1257. I have read that this locomotive was named Uppingham following the 1934 refusal by the then headmaster of the school, Jack Wolfenden, to allow a Southern Railway Schools class to carry the name Uppingham. The Southern Railway then duly renamed their locomotive Bradfield. Photographs of the actual Uppingham Bradfield locomotive are akin to rocking horse droppings or even dragon's teeth, and hence this view of Harrow, a sister locomotive from the same class. Today, both original Southern Railway Uppingham nameplates reside safely in the Uppingham School archives. Returning to the Ironstone quarry, the Peckett 040 Uppingham No. 1 was transferred in 1918 to the company's ironstone pits at Market Overton, and it was replaced at Uppingham by this 060 locomotive named Adderley, built in 1915 by the Bristol-based manufacturers Avonside. At the same time, number 1806, also built by Avonside and originally named Uppingham, was added to the fleet to cope with the increased traffic due to war production. This later view shows the locomotive renamed as Dysart. In common with at least one other ironstone quarry system nearby at Pilton, German prisoners of war were put to work in the Uppingham quarries during the war. But with the cessation of hostilities in 1918, the demand for ironstone declined dramatically, and there was a temporary closure in 1921. Complete closure came about 1926, largely brought about by the general strike, with miners seen here being addressed by Arthur J. Cook, General Secretary of the Miners' Federation of Great Britain. The two steam locomotives and the steam shovel were transferred to the company's ironstone quarries at Market Overton, and the Uppingham tracks were lifted. By 1930, all vestige of the ironstone line had gone, leaving only the tunnel under the Uppingham to Corby Road as a reminder of the industrial period of this part of Uppingham. The Railways Act of 1921 created the grouping of the Big Four, with the Uppingham branch becoming part of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway, the LMS. Jack Ritchie's again.
The type of engine that was used on the Uppingham branch when I was a lad, had the 242 tankers and the 062 tanks, the wet coal tanks.
And an example of an ex-Midland 044, such as ran on the Uppingham branch, is seen here probably at St Pancras, judging by the condensing apparatus for use on the Metropolitan Widened Lines route. Philip Ritchie's, Jack Ritchie's brother, is seen here in 1932, pretending to operate the yard crane at Uppingham. According to Jack's daughter-in-law, the Ritchie's family clocked up 367.5 years of combined railway service in the Rutland area. The advent of the Uppingham railway line meant that the Uppingham Town gasworks on Glayston Road could now be supplied with coal by rail rather than by horse transport. Tar, for use on the roads, was, however, still collected by horse tanker from the gasworks to the station, where Jack Ritchie's remembers its being pumped into square rail tankers such as these.
Another interesting feature down at Uppingham, they used to bring horse-drawn tanks of tar from the Uppingham gasworks and pump them by hand into a tar tanker, a railway-borne tanker, and this used to take about anything from a week to a fortnight to fill. A local man named Tilly, who used to cart the coal from the station yard to the gasworks, used to do this job, and I can always remember him and his son using this old rotary pump to pump this tar out at a very slow rate.
Was the tanker square?
A square tanker. Well, there seemed to be all square ones in those days that the tar came in, and then later on they had the round ones with the steam pipes through that they used to connect to a stationary steam engine to keep the tar fluid. And then they used to run this into barrels for tarring the roads, transport them away and tar the roads with it.
For many new boys at the school, there were no doubt sufficient family funds to afford private transport from the ex-Midland Railway Manton station, a faster route than the school special via Seaton, as advised in 1936 by the then headmaster Jack Wolfenden. However, for my uncle, when he was a pupil at the school in the 1930s, it was the school special train which took the more circuitous ex-LNWR route via Seaton, as in this 1938 timetable found in a family photograph album. A May 1938 view of Uppingham Station, again from the family album and my uncle's time at the school. Jack Ritchie's again.
Mr. Rickard was the station master during the time that I used to visit the station, but previous to him the only one I can remember was a station master named Rollins.
John Schlesinger's short 1961 film Terminus, a portrait of a day in the life of Waterloo Station. Perhaps Schlesinger's fascination with railways was informed by his experience of the Uppingham School special trains during his time as a pupil at the school. Schoolboys' trunks awaiting collection at the station. A PLA, passenger luggage in advance label, no doubt from an item of luggage to be collected from the school, courtesy of the LMS. The capital M probably denotes the LMS Midland Division. And for the journey, there was refreshment at hand. A school snack box, redeemable with this 1937 ticket, this time courtesy of the LM&SR, the company's preferred acronym immediately following the 1923 grouping. Perhaps the ticket was printed sometime earlier than it was actually used. Robert Sterndale Bennett, grandson of the composer William Sterndale Bennett, became the school's music director in 1908, and in 1942 Robert compiled a series of maps for the Home Guard, containing numerous photographs of railway and other bridges, all for military use in case Britain were invaded, including the Welland Viaduct and the Five Arches on the Uppingham branch, as well as numerous other local bridges. The British Transport Commission came into being on the 1st of January 1948 through the Transport Act of 1947. Thus, the Big Four companies were nationalised to form British Railways. Although some might have feared that with nationalisation Uppingham's trains had literally come to the end of the line, nevertheless, with the help of a breakdown crane, no doubt an unusual visitor to the branch, services continued for another 17 years. And perhaps some of the Uppingham schoolboys might secretly have hoped that such an incident would hold up their arrival back at school. But of course the school specials continued, with their emotionally charged departure from the station of origin, as witnessed by the following BBC Archive 1949 video, not specifically about Uppingham, but nevertheless depicting the stiff upper lip parental approach at the time to this somewhat painful process.
After the carefree outdoor lessons of the ski school, learning in England seemed a dull business when, on Friday, the specials were leaving with youngsters returning to school after the Christmas holidays. A brisk, manly send-off from the pater is, of course, part of the tradition. Not so long ago, he too was being seen off by his father in the same hearty manner. The girls were going back too, in trains of their own, and without quite so much fuss. All types of both generations were here. The pushful little chap bound to get on, the one who believes his best friend is his dog, the fondest of mothers who will fuss, and Daddy still at it. But at last the whistle blows, and that really is goodbye. When Shakespeare wrote of the whining schoolboy creeping like snail unwillingly to school, he could never have been visualizing a cheery crowd like this. Whether behind it all they really do believe their parents' story, that these are the happiest years of their lives, is a matter for conjecture. But to the innocent eyes of the very young, a big brother at boarding school is every inch a hero.
Maybe a more joyous anticipation greeted the end of term school specials, which of course continued through the 1940s and 1950s, but only of course to be followed at the end of the holes by the school special, Back to School Again. A 1952 letter from the head teacher of Oundle School, referring to vandalism between the two rival schools on school special trains, And even in the 1970s, when I was an Uppingham pupil, there had been a 10-year ban on supporters from both schools at all sports fixtures for fear of further vandalism. Public passenger services to Uppingham continued to thrive throughout this period at this quiet terminal station in its rural setting. And despite some overgrowth encroaching onto the platform areas, coal traffic, as you can see, also continued to thrive. General freight traffic is still in evidence in this 1958 view of the goods shed, with wagons being loaded. And the ex-LNWR vintage wooden crane is still in use in this 1961 view. Uppingham never boasted a signal box, only a ground frame. Here, seen in this early 1960s view behind a group of schoolboys studying the accompanying track plan, affixed to the station building wall in front of them. Motive power on the branch at this time still included ex-pre-grouping stock, such as this ex-Great Central Class 9A LNWR N4 062 tank, seen on an Uppingham working at Seaton in August 1952. These locomotives had started life on the Great Central in the early part of the last century, and by the 1950s they were 50 or so years old, but still going strong. A 1957 view of a ballast train at Uppingham, headed by an ex-LNWR Super D-Class 080, a view taken by local railwayman Charlie Harris. This class of locomotives were also ex-pre-grouping stock, being developed from the LNWR C-Class, such as number 1803, seen here at Rugby about 1920. Other ex-pre-grouping stock running on the line at this time included Tilbury tanks, such as number 41975, seen here arriving at Uppingham in June 1958. These locomotives were based at Peterborough Spittal Bridge. These so-called Tilbury tanks were originally designed and built for the London, Tilbury and Southend Railway by Thomas Whiteleg, and later LMS-built members of the class, on withdrawal from service, were kept laid up at Southend for over 25 years, before being redeployed, for example, in the Rutland area from the late 1950s. Number 80, later number 41966 of this class, named Thundersley, and seen here, preserved in LT and SR livery, is part of the National Collection, on loan to Bressingham Steam Museum. Number 41975 is again captured here on the 23rd of April 1959 by the late H.C. Casserly, with his characteristic photographic signature, that is, his veteran motor vehicle, seen here in the right of the picture. Although HCC's son, Richard Casserly, retained his father's last antique vehicle, this was sadly offered for sale in July 2018, following Richard's demise, at which time the comprehensive Casserly photographic archive, believed to include every station in the UK and Ireland, was also dispersed. Sister Tilbury tank to number 41975, number 41928, is seen here storming from under the Five Arches in 1959. Ex-Great Northern stock also featured on the line, and here Ivert C12, GNR C2 Atlantic tank 67397 heads an Uppingham train out of Seaton. The driver is George Gardner, about 1955. Ex-LMS 3F 060 number 47300 is seen here at Uppingham in charge of a push and pull unit in 1958, although the stock is clearly not at the time in use as a push and pull, since the driver end is facing the locomotive. By the 1960s, BR standard class locomotives had taken over, as seen here on a train approaching the Five Arches from Seaton. BR standard class IVERT 2MT 262, number 41285, built at Crewe in 1950, is seen here leaving Seaton for Uppingham. Sister class 2MT number 41214 approaches Uppingham about 1960. And here seen arriving at the station platform at around the same period, or maybe even on the same day. And here, returning to Seaton over the viaduct shortly after leaving Uppingham. Here, a third member of the class, number 41321, awaits departure from the terminus. Here, standard class number 84007 approaches the station on the 7th of June 1960. This bicycle ticket dates from, or at least was printed, between 1948 and 1962, the year that the British Transport Commission, BTC on the ticket, was superseded by the British Railways Board. M on the ticket indicates London Midland region, whereas this single second-class ticket dates from 1962 or later, as it is marked simply M, without the BTC legend. Likewise, this child's ticket displays only M, and so is also from 1962 or later. The Seaton end of the line was, and still is, in a quiet rural setting, across the valley from the Welland Viaduct. Here, the push and pull service is about to depart from Seaton's Bay platform. Here, again, headed by class 2MT number 41279. Even towards the end of operation of the line, this ex-LNWR lamppost remained intact, as did the ground frame, seen here with operator Jack Marshall and his colleague, taking water from the Seaton water tower and the one-road engine shed for locomotives servicing the Uppingham branch. And our final experience of public service trains on the Uppingham branch comes courtesy of WA Bill Camwell, who leads us on a journey up the branch from Seaton.
Uppingham was the terminus of a 3 3/4 mile line from Seaton on the Nene Valley route to Peterborough. The Uppingham branch opened in 1894. Cam visited the line when it was one of the last refuges for the famous Tilbury 442 tanks. LMS built 41949 was one of the last 3 engines of the class to be withdrawn in 1960. Passenger services were suspended in 1960, but goods trains and specials for Uppingham School continued to run until May 1964.
Army surplus commercial vehicles, here seen at Slough Trading Estate in 1920, and which encouraged the post-war market for road transport, which in turn spelt the eventual downfall of the UK's local railway network some 40 years later. The April 1960 announcement of withdrawal of public service passenger trains to Uppingham, with the last service operating on the 13th of June that year. the line had been host to public service trains for just over 65 years. It is believed that the headmaster of Uppingham School at the time, Martin Lloyd, was more interested in the local government Commission for England's proposal to disband Rutland, which took effect in 1974, than in the closure of the railway line to Uppingham. Rutland was reinstated as a county in 1997, but not, alas, the county's only branch line railway. However, school biology teacher K.G. Guy Messenger actively opposed the closure of the line, and he also produced a learned work on the railway flora of Rutland, a copy of which is now held in the Uppingham School archives. Following the 1960 withdrawal of public passenger services, the Uppingham branch hosted a number of rail tour excursions. Here, ex-LMS Fowler 4P number 42350 heads an RCTS tour on the 25th of August 1962. Here we see number 42350 pausing on the spur line at Fletton later in the tour. Another RCTS tour in May 1963, aptly named the Joint Line Tour because it included, among other joint lines, the Melton Mowbray to Market Harborough Great Northern and LNWR joint line, took in Uppingham on the way. Here we see ex-LMS 4F 060 number 44414 at Uppingham on the same RCTS tour. Manton Station, on the Nottingham to Kettering line, 3.5 miles away from Uppingham, was to remain open for a further 6 years. Ironically, it had been named Manton for Uppingham from opening in 1848, but was renamed simply Manton in 1934. Although not actually shown on this timetable, Manton was the sole calling point between Nottingham Midland and Kettering for this express, which ran from 1959 to 1962. It is believed that the Manton stop originated from the time when a director of the former Midland Railway lived in the vicinity. Final closure of the Uppingham branch came in 1964. This pen and ink drawing by J.A. Holmes, a pupil at Uppingham School, shows the former station building after closure. The station master's house, out of the drawing to the left, was demolished around 1972. In the 1970s, I was shown by the then head of art of the school a short cine film about a spoof train robbery, which featured the former station buildings. However, I have since not been able to locate this film, and if anyone out there knows of its whereabouts now, I would be pleased to hear from you. This view down Station Road probably dates from 1965, and certainly soon after closure. The water tower had gone by 1969, but the goods shed was still in existence in 1975, although surrounded by light industrial buildings. The Seaton line continued in service after the final closure of the Uppingham branch, and here the Stamford to Rugby push and pull service, believed to have been the last surviving steam push and pull service in the country at the time, is seen here probably in 1965, running alongside the former Uppingham branch trackbed on the left, with its tracks lifted. The last Stamford push and pull steam service ran in 1966, and no doubt the writer of these Latin lines from Virgil's Aeneid could assume in the 1960s that people might understand the allusion to the sacking of Troy. For the benefit of a more modern audience, the quotation reads in English, "The final day has arrived and the unavoidable time for the city of Troy. R.I.P. May its soul rest in peace." Final closure of the line came later in 1966. Here, Seaton Station is seen shortly after closure. Some traces of the former Uppingham branch are still visible today, such as these Station Road signs and this LNWR retaining wall, as well as the LNWR stable building and the LMS period weighbridge, and of course the remarkably well-preserved viaduct just out of Uppingham towards Seaton. Here we can see one of the overbridges still in situ in 2024, and the 5 arches, under one of which the Uppingham line passed, still carry the Manton to Kettering main line, and local signposts still bear the legend Seaton Station, just in case anybody needs to catch the next train back to Uppingham. Seaton Station itself survives as a vehicle breaker's yard, and there is a pig of an irony here somewhere. The end of a line which carried trains for 70 years and has now been closed for at least 62 years. However, Uppingham trains live on in a number of models of the branch. For example, Martin Olley's 3mm model. Here we see 3 items from Martin's collection of prototype realia from Uppingham: an LNWR lamp, the Uppingham staff for single line working, and a yellow lamp sign that hung below one of the station lamps. All these items are laid out on the miniature trackwork. Here are some views of Martin's layout as featured in the model railway press. In the 1970s, prototype models produced a kit for the goods shed in 2mm and 4mm versions, which I purchased with a view to building my own model of the station, which sadly never came to fruition in the way that I had intended. As so often, life got in the way of modelling. However, by about 1972, I had discovered that there was an EM gauge layout of Uppingham in the making, being created by Leicester Model Railway Group, led by Leicester Group member the late John Marriott. And John came to visit me when I was a pupil at Uppingham School to tell me all about the layout. I first actually saw the layout on show at Solihull in 1975, and it was exhibited at various other exhibitions over the years after that, being purchased from the Leicester Model Railway Group around 1990 by Peter Simmerson, also one of the originators of the layout, who had over time constructed much of the layout's scratch-built and kit-built stock. For a number of years I had lost contact with Peter, but in 2011 we recommenced correspondence, and I discovered that the layout had continued to be exhibited by Peter and colleagues and was being looked after at Cleveland Model Railway Club premises in Redcar, where it had been lovingly maintained in full working order. And on the 3rd of April 2024, the layout was safely delivered to the 17th century Uppingham schoolroom, where it now resides, less than half a mile from the site of the prototype station. And although the layout had never physically been to Uppingham before, this was nevertheless a serendipitous homecoming for it. The arrival of the layout in the old schoolroom brought back memories for me from over 60 years ago, when this building was the school's art room, and I was busily engaged there in planning my erstwhile model of the nearby station. An Uppingham School Railway Society thrived for a short while from 1959, but alas, since then it has become dormant as a school society. Perhaps interest in the model can now be reignited phoenix-like from the ashes after 66 years to offer it a new life for future generations.